Your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Sunday Talk.
Good talk. News talk.
Talk Radio.
The Tice Man cometh.
Stir up your Sundays with Richard Tice.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
A very good morning to one and all. It is Sunday the 27th of February. It's just after 10 o'clock. And as I look outside the skyline over London, it is truly the best, brightest blue sky since I ever started presenting here on Talk Radio. So bright skies here in the UK, but of course we're going to be talking throughout the show about the challenges and the horrors going on in Ukraine since Russia invaded under President Putin last week. So lots of updates on Ukraine. We're also going to be talking about breast cancer, the crisis in the NHS in terms of cancer diagnoses. Unions have chosen this week, of all weeks, as a good time to go on strike in the Tube here in London. Unbelievable. We'll be talking about sanctions, do they work, whether we should have more of them, and the future consequences for all of us on what's going on in Ukraine. We've got some great guests. I've also got a retired surgeon, a military surgeon, talk about what may be going on in the hospitals, the field hospitals in Ukraine. We've got professors, we've got MPs, but I want your input, please. That's what makes a great show. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text us, 87222 using the word talk, or tweet at Talk Radio and I'll get to the tweets. And of course, if you want to, you can watch us live. Download the app, which is of course Talk Radio TV, or on the website, YouTube, Apple TV, Samsung, Amazon Fire, Roku, Rakuten. There's no excuse. There's so many ways to get involved. Make sure you stay with us throughout the show. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Well, a very warm welcome. And as you know, I like to start my show on every Sunday morning with my sermon from here, the pulpit of the Talk Radio studio. And as I look out, and I've often talked about the word leadership, and goodness me, haven't we seen some leadership from President Zelensky of Ukraine this week? He is leading from the front, a proud, strong, determined nation who are admirably resisting the advances of the Russian army and President Putin. Now, a week ago, I couldn't really see the incentive for Putin to invade. I was wrong. I thought that he would continue to keep his forces on the border and that essentially he'd got much of what he wanted. But actually, he's shown by invading that he's not the same man he was 20 years ago, that people in the West, leaders in the West, thought they could do business with. And he has made Russia, tragically, an international pariah for the remainder of his leadership, however long that is, until there is regime change in Russia. And this is a massive, massive wake-up call for all of us in the West, because you must note that China has been worryingly silent in this matter. No condemnation whatsoever of Russia's actions, of President Putin. And that's because I believe that there is a new axis of evil descending in the world, the axis around China and Russia. And I've essentially created a new word. This axis is what I call Tice, China and Russia, led by, let's be very clear, led by a pair of bullies, dictators of communist regimes, authoritarian, who kill people who disagree with them, for whom democracy is just in name only, a pure fig leaf, who don't respect opposition or freedom of speech. We need to understand about this axis. And there's an amazing sort of map in today's Sunday Times that I'd urge you to look at, if you can find it online or in the paper, showing essentially the countries that are with China and Russia as opposed to the rest. And it's clear that Putin has done a deal with China using energy to prop up his regime, his finances. He's clearly done a deal to sell China huge quantities of wheat and also apparently a long-term 30-year gas deal. So you can see what he's doing. He's basically reducing his dependency on the West and increasing his links and his dependency on China. And that's why I call this word Tice. And I think we're going to have to be really, really aware of this in the future. And I also think we're going to be talking today about sanctions. I want bigger, faster sanctions. We're going to essentially have to economically make life harder and harder and harder for Putin's regime. I know it's a tough word, but we're essentially going to have to economically strangle Putin's regime. And that may mean for all of us in the West, short-term pain for medium-term gain. And the oligarchs, we've heard a bit about them, haven't we? They've got to actually get off the fence now. They've got to say, are they with us in the West and denounce Putin? If they're not prepared to denounce Putin, then essentially, in my mind, they're with Putin. In which case, frankly, we don't want you or your assets or your money here in the UK. And we'll be talking later in the show about Chelsea and Roman Abramovich. He clearly fears the direction of travel with regard to sanctions. But I think actually we're going to have to get to the point where we freeze the assets of Chelsea Football Club as a clear demonstration that it is not acceptable to have Putin's money or his oligarchs controlling huge chunks of money and assets and wealth here in London and indeed the West. And so it may be that actually Chelsea has to be put under an official receiver whilst it's offered for sale to a new buyer. And I think Abramovich sees the direction of travel. That's why he did what he did yesterday in trying to say that he's putting it under trustees' control. We've also got to make it clear to those in the city who've made fortunes out of liaising with Russian companies, the financiers, the lawyers, the accountants. They've made millions and millions. It's got to stop now. They've got to stop dealing with Russian companies, Russian clients, Russian corporates. We have essentially got to put Russian corporate activity into Coventry. We've got to freeze its activity. We have to know that this is going to stop. And those greedy individuals who've been taking those millions along the way, they should be ashamed of themselves. And it's got to stop. It really has got to stop. And yet, of course, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is right. We shouldn't be enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine because that really would accelerate the horrific route towards World War III. We've got to hope that there's a long Ukrainian insurgency, which will have a heavy cost on Russian troops, Russian money, and that will allow breathing space for internal events, for pressure in Russia, eventually to overthrow Putin. That surely is the objective. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, Russia did actually retract once before after a long campaign. In Afghanistan in the 1980s, Russia had to pull out, they had to withdraw after about a decade of an insurgency by the Afghan people. So that has to be the objective. Meanwhile, the EU EU nations are coming to the table on sanctions after behaving initially disgracefully a few days ago. It looks like they have now agreed that we have got to kick Russian banks, Russian financial institutions out of the SWIFT banking system, the payment system. And that will involve some short-term pain. But Germany has been way too dependent on Russian gas, and so has Italy. But they have finally agreed. And so what we've got to do urgently, surely, is to open up the supply of gas from other places, the North Sea, the US, the Middle East, to replace that Russian gas. That reduces the dependency. But we in the UK have also got our own dependency on energy And we're exposed not to Russia, but to China. Because I've said it before, but a Chinese billionaire controls the electricity supplies for some 8 million customers in London and the southeast, who could literally pull the plug. And that is the point. We're now dependent on Chinese people for our electricity supplies here in the southeast and in London. That is foolish, that is not smart, that is not strategic. And the big lesson here is that we have to eliminate this dependency on other nations, on potentially rogue actors for critical national infrastructure, critical national items like utilities. Here endeth my Sunday sermon on Sunday, the 27th of February. Give us a call with your views. Do you agree with me? Do you think I'm being too soft or too harsh? 0344 499 1000. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
It's not all bad news. It's Talk Radio.
Nappy.
Without compromise or comparison.
Radio you can't turn off because the switch is broken.
You having a laugh, ain't you? Discuss, debate, deliver. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and that has certainly got people going. My Sunday sermon this morning, the messages are coming in, and the phone calls. We've got one here. We need to talk about what's the impact of all of this for British families, and that is quite right. And I've been talking about that actually in recent weeks when we started talking about Ukraine, the impact on petrol prices, which of course will go up, the impact on gas prices, which are going up, and the impact on food prices, which will go up because, of course, Ukraine and Russia are massive growers and exporters of wheat. We'll be talking that again later on in the show and future shows. But we should also talk about what's the impact on the ground in Ukraine. And I thought it'd be interesting to understand the pressures that may be going on in the war hospitals, the field hospitals. Because, of course, you know, we hear of the tragic losses, people who've been killed, but generally that means far more people have actually been wounded, potentially horrific wounds. And therefore I'm delighted that we can talk now with a former retired army surgeon who was in the forces for 17 years, operated across 3 war zones, and also operated and worked for the International Red Cross and Field Hospitals, Gavin Boyer, who has therefore got considerable experience of what it must be like for surgeons and doctors in war hospitals. Gavin, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Tice Talk. I think your exclusive first on Talk Radio. How are you doing this morning?
Very good, thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for having me on.
Great pleasure. Well, I thought it'd just be really informative and educational for us all to understand, Gavin, what maybe the pressures and the conditions going on almost as we speak in the field hospitals or hospitals that are potentially also under fire and shelling in a war zone such as Kyiv at the moment, or other towns and cities?
Well, it's certainly a very worrying situation, isn't it? I can tell you what the medical teams will be doing is having a real determination to do their jobs. There's no doubt about that, and they are going to have plenty of work to do. Quite the size of the problem is very hard for us to gauge at the moment. But as you say, the number of wounded will exceed the number of deaths, probably by a factor of 4 or more. So there are going to be a lot of significant wounds there. The medical teams will have additional stresses on them, though. It's not just about doing their job now. It's that additional anxiety of the circumstances in which they're working, the fear for their own safety and security. And remember, although they're the medical teams there on the ground working, they're also living there. They have families who are there.
Of course.
And there's that anxiety going on about how are their families whilst they're in working. So it's a very stressful situation for them, but overall there will be a determination to get on and do the job.
And I mean, it must be incredibly stressful for those reasons that you've set out. And how much preparation may they have done, and things like medical supplies? I mean, what sort of rate of consumption of supplies would you expect to see in a war zone like that, and the ability of the logistics to essentially to replenish those supplies?
Well, I suppose that the honest answer is it's going to vary depending on the phase that they're going through. We have to remember that there's been a war going on there in part for 8 years. So it's not a country which has suddenly found itself in this situation. They do have military hospitals, but the rate which they're using medicines, supplies, is going to be going up tremendously. They're going to be seeing wounds that they're not necessarily used to seeing, particularly in the built-up areas. And it's not just, of course, the military hospitals. It's going to be the civilian hospitals, which are suddenly seeing an influx of wounded from the civilian population as well as military. So a lot of stress is there, and a lot of consumption of supplies, not just the things that we would think about in terms of drugs, medicines, anesthetics, and so on. It's simple things like water. It's things like sterile gloves. So those can become the limiting factor in being able to take care of patients, and where they go after they've had their treatment, how you then deal with those casualties whom you've already treated.
Yes, of course. And the ability to replenish those supplies, even as you say, just things like water, depending on sort of the direction of travel and the amount of shelling, I guess that becomes more and more at risk and therefore more challenging for the medical teams.
It does, and for the medical teams, for the hospital administrative teams, for those who are trying to run the system rather than just the individual doctor-patient, the medical team relationship there. It's the broader context of how do you keep a hospital going? How do you get the patients to you? Because helicopters bringing in patients become targets. The roads are clogged in both directions with potential people fleeing leaving the situation. So the basis of getting patients to the medical facilities is also a real challenge. Keeping that open is difficult.
And the sort of would the medical teams be working on 2 or 3 shifts a day, or is it sort of all hands on deck working sort of huge, very long shifts? How is that managed, and how difficult must that be for the medical teams?
It is very difficult, but that's a leadership and management problem. And it's a very important one. You've hit on a really important factor there, which is when the system is inundated like that, when you know that there are dozens more casualties piled up outside, waiting outside for treatment, it's very difficult, I can say this from personal experience, to walk away at the end of your shift, so to speak. And that's where leadership comes in, is ensuring that your medical team does take a break, that you do conserve resources so that you're able to continue for more than just a 24-hour burst. But as I say, that's a management and leadership problem, which certainly needs to be addressed in those circumstances.
Particularly, obviously, because no one really knows how long the actual, in a sense, this goes on for. If it's obviously a very different thing if it's weeks and months as opposed to just days before, heaven forbid, essentially Kyiv and the main cities fall to the Russian forces. I guess that, as you say, that pressure on families must be immense, both sides, the family at home, but also the medics working, not knowing if their own families are safe.
It is very much a factor, and people also need to feel that what's going on is being recognised by the outside world as well. There's a real value in knowing that you're not alone there. That people, even if people aren't able to help you directly, that it is known about, and the other factor is the news and rumours that then spring up in those situations where there's uncertainty about what's happening. Have the streets now been filled with Russian soldiers, with what weaponry is being used, what's happening, and there's a real vacuum around that of trying to get news, to get information about what to expect.
It must be utterly terrifying for everybody, but sort of doubly terrifying, when you're trying to save lives, knowing that you're all at risk in those field hospitals.
Yes, but I come back to what I said at the beginning. There will be, above all of that, there will be a determination to get on with the job and know that actually you are able to make a difference, not to the whole population, but to the patient in front of you, and then to those who are waiting outside. So that's the thing that the teams will be holding on to.
They'll be totally focused on. Yeah. Gavin, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with us about what's actually going on in hospitals, the pressures, the stresses on the medical teams, the surgeons, the doctors, the nurses, something that I suspect is often overlooked, but a real key part of trying to save lives, prevent deaths. That was Gavin Boyer, who operated in 3 war zones in field hospitals and also for the International Red Cross, and therefore has great experience about those stresses and strains. I think we've just got time for one call before the bottom of the hour. Richard is in Manchester. Good morning, Richard. What are your thoughts this morning?
Oh, good morning, Richard. I'm very sad this morning. Thank God that we left the EU. And what is happening here, I can only put that at the blame of Ursula and van der Leyen. She's responsible for negligently getting on with trying to get the British government to get back into Europe, and she's been neglecting what has been going on in the background, and it's very, very important. I think she's absolutely hopeless as a leader. What she's done, she's poked the Russian bear with a little twig, and her and Mairead McGuinness, they'll rue the day that they colluded for the against the English with Blair and Adonis and Grayling.
They've, she's part of disastrous degrading of German military forces when she was the defence minister, and I think she is now making some progress. In fairness, Richard, in terms of getting the EU countries now to agree that Russia should be kicked out of the SWIFT payment system. But certainly, it's been a slow process.
Very, very slow, and she doesn't recognise anything. She's being led by her superiors in Germany and probably Macron to that extent to do things, but she's absolutely blameless in everything. And that came on when you were an MEP and when Nigel Farage told her exactly what she was doing. I remember the day.
Absolutely, Richard. Well, as you say, we're better off out. We're able to lead at the top table as opposed to having to compromise within the EU. Richard, thank you so much for that. Stay with us. We'll be taking your calls, 0344 499 1000. Coming up, we're going to be talking about Ukraine through the show, but also about other issues, about the tube strike, about the crisis with breast cancer screening, and much more. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
A first magnitude star of common sense.
The Tice Man.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and keep those calls and tweets coming up. We've got one here. Oh dear, Richard, you've lost my vote. You're not capable of looking at the big picture of what's going off. NATO is the aggressor as much as Russia. Oh dear, this battle has gone on for centuries. Lord Dida, I don't know where you're coming from on that. NATO clearly is not the aggressor here. It's Russian forces that have invaded another sovereign nation. Clean and simple. Not sure what planet you're on this morning, Lord Dida, but there we are. Anyway, another issue which, in a sense, when I was giving my show, Tice Talk, last week, we had the breaking news that the Queen had tested positive for COVID. And she's obviously had a difficult few days. She's had to cancel a few virtual engagements and things. But I think we have got an update as to how she's doing at the moment. I'm delighted now we've got Rupert Bell, the Talk Radio correspondent, just to talk us through this. Rupert, good morning to you. So a week ago, the Queen tested positive for COVID. What's the latest news that you're aware of, Rupert?
Well, the latest news is that they say she's continuing to do light duties, but on Wednesday she was supposed to have a reception, which I think was for various ambassadors, a foreign office, a reception at Windsor Castle. But obviously, in light of the events in Ukraine, that has been cancelled, and she's been advised that it's being cancelled and that she's got to continue sort of looking after herself. And clearly, she is without question on the frail side now, and it's just a level of precaution. Yes, she's continuing to operate. I know that she's, after I spoke to you last week, she got buoyed by the fact that she managed to see her colours winning a race at Newbury, so that would have given her an immense thrill, being such a racing fan.
Absolutely,
and I know,
should have enjoyed that.
She did, and it was not a bad winner either, but... so she would, but I do know that clearly she is increasingly, as a 95-year-old going on 96-year-old woman, you're going to be frail, but mentally she's still as sharp as you want. And that's excellent. Well, and that is no surprise. But clearly it is becoming increasingly hard for her to get around. She's not as mobile as she was. And clearly the palace are mindful of that. And everything that's going on. And of course, she'll be being briefed with everything that's going on with regard to the Ukrainian situation. That is very much what the Prime Minister has to do, and that is her role as head of state, that she is fully briefed on what is going on. But in terms of fulfilling duties, then clearly that's something that has to be taken into very serious consideration as to what she can and is physically able to do.
But we are hopeful that she is going in the right direction, Rupert.
Well, as much as we are aware, they don't like to give a running commentary on her health, but clearly, that it's not deemed to be a serious COVID that she's got. It's just what many have had. If you're fully jabbed, it's sort of a mild case of flu. But at 95, you've got to be mindful. So all being well, yes, but she's got some key dates in March. There are a couple of engagements that one is, I think, a Commonwealth service, and then there is the memorial service for Prince Philip at the end of the month. So there are a couple of key dates that she's expected to attend later on, and I'm sure they'll be doing everything they can to make sure that she is as well as she is able to be, so that she can fulfill those engagements, because I know how important both those engagements are, particularly the last, which will take place at Westminster Abbey on the 29th of March.
Well, that's right, and all our prayers are that she continues to make progress and a speedy recovery. Rupert Bell, thank you so much for that quick update on the condition of the Queen, who, of course, last week tested positive for COVID and has had to essentially cancel some of her virtual engagements. All our prayers are for a continuing speedy recovery. We've got Richard in Kent, I think, on the line. Richard, good morning. Lots of Richards this morning. We've had Richard from Manchester and now Richard in Kent. What's going on?
Good morning, Richard. Yeah, sorry to be another one. Right. You made some points earlier about we're all going to have to feel some pain as a result of this. You also made sorry, Tom, I don't want to be too greedy, but you also made a point about people who should or shouldn't be allowed to buy a football club. But let's start with how people like me, the average man in the street, is going to feel this pain, because I feel let down by our liberal media and our politicians who must have seen this coming. And I'd even include Talk Radio in this. They were very supportive of Biden, even when he was sniffing children and behaving in a very inappropriate manner with kids on live TV. That was never really picked up upon, whereas every misdemeanor that Donald Trump made was amplified with body language experts and God knows what else. There were no body language experts when Joe Biden was behaving in the way that he was behaving. Nobody was talking about those terrified kids that he was had his hands all over.
That's right. But the impact here in the UK, as I just touched on, Richard, of course, is going to be most directly in terms of fuel prices at the petrol pumps, on gas prices, electricity prices. They're going to soar, particularly if Russia essentially reacts to being kicked out of the SWIFT payment system. And that's the most direct that I think will happen, as well as rising food prices, rising grain prices.
Well, that basically amounts to a form of rationing, doesn't it? I mean, this is going to. I mean, our freedoms are being restricted anyway, down to this sort of green nonsense. And it seems to me that this situation is going to consolidate that in many ways. It's almost as if, I don't want to be too conspiratorial, it's almost as if this is sort of part of the plan. This is almost what the sort of Great Reset is shaping up to be like.
I, Richard, don't buy into these conspiracy theories, that this reset. I think, to be honest, most of it is incompetent, weak, failing leadership, more sort of cock-up as opposed to conspiracy. That's my sense on it, and that's why I've continually talked about we need strong leadership. And actually, I think we're just beginning to see some of that from the likes of Ben Wallace, who's very clear, very robust in the stance that he's been taking. But there is going to be, without question, Richard, some short-term pain.
Well, and you mentioned the axis of evil as well with China. Obviously, China, the nefarious country, as well as Russia. But I'm more concerned. I'm more concerned about Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, and the roles that their leaders, and the silence from both sides of the house.
You're talking about the restrictions on liberty and freedom of speech, and the sort of the alternative authoritarian suppression of freedoms.
Exactly, and it seems the actions of Vladimir Putin have taken everybody's eyes off of that. Not though they were being scrutinised properly anyway, but I'm concerned at the silence.
Yes, I think it is fair to say that there's no question that the British political leaders of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and Keir Starmer, they were completely silent about the absurd reaction and authoritarian oppression from the likes of Justin Trudeau.
They're being so silent?
It's a very good question, which I haven't actually got the answer to, Richard. But maybe
you should ask them.
Thank you, Richard. Maybe the next caller, Simon from Basingstoke, has got a view on that or something else. Good morning, Simon.
Yes, good morning, Richard. I think your earlier point about Russia and China being allies is a very important one, and it seems to be one that our leaders seem to be very determined to ignore. One of the consequences of the Belt and Road means that China can send goods directly from China by rail to Europe in 11 days. Well, if you can transport goods, you can transport troops. I think that the West needs to wake up, especially NATO, and realise that what we are facing is a combination of two massive continental powers, both of which are run by effective dictators. And if, say, for instance, China does attempt to capture Taiwan and fails, what's to say that's not necessarily going to deter them from their expansionist aims? And we have a very, very weak NATO, which is incapable of meeting its own obligations, let alone projecting power beyond Europe. And America may not always be there to support us. Our politicians need to wake up to real politique.
You're absolutely right, Simon, that I think the US has got almost a vacuum of leadership under Biden, We saw that with the terrible evacuation from Afghanistan. I think Putin has played off that. But I wonder, Simon, is China actually smarter than that? And are they essentially ending up making us dependent on them in different ways, in economic ways, as opposed to through the use of military force? That's my take on it. You've touched on the Belt and Road Initiative, but then there's their desire to invest and design and operate our nuclear power stations, research grants to universities, academics, Chinese corporates owning our utilities. It's a sort of creeping domination of critical elements of here in the UK.
But the issue is, and again, this is something that's not well understood, is China and Russia can't afford to wait. They both have declining populations. Their populations are crashing in size. One of the reasons Putin no doubt wanted to do what he did, i.e. invade Ukraine and give Russia shorter, more defensible borders, is because in 20 years, Russia will not even be able to field the military forces it fields today, which have already proven inadequate. And the same will be true for China. You know, China's one-child policy, though it's allowed it to move out of poverty very quickly, has had a catastrophic effect on its population.
Which of course, they're essentially now trying to row back from, aren't they?
They're trying to row back from, but they've also admitted that the Chinese government's even admitted that they've overestimated population growth by something like 100 million people. So these countries are very dictatorial countries, especially China, which is high. You know, the Communist Party has enormous power, and that power is only going to decline.
Well, let's wait and see. What we need to do, though, Simon, is reduce our dependency on them in so many ways. That was Simon in Basingstoke with his concerns about China. And I am really concerned about our dependency, our economic dependency on China. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. And then we're going to be talking to Professor Carol Sikora about the breast cancer crisis in the NHS. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Radio. Unbelievably realistic.
Home of common sense.
Measured mean Machiavellian.
Non-complicated radio of a complicated age.
The People's Parliament.
Just like the real thing.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. The tweets and messages are coming in. Here's a text message, a little bit grumpy. Richard, why is a left-wing comedian on YouTube, Jimmy Dore, making you look like a dunce regarding Ukraine? Educate yourself, posh boy. That's not very friendly. Anyway, maybe you'll expand a bit more. But apart from Ukraine, which we're going to be talking about sanctions later on in the show and whether they work and don't work, and the ongoing crisis, we need to talk about other domestic matters, one of which, of course, is what's going on with some of the cancer crisis issues with the NHS. And there was news this week of that about 1 million fewer women had been screened for breast cancer during the first year of the COVID crisis. And I thought it'd be good to talk to Professor Carol Sikora, who of course is a well-known oncologist, to discuss this further. Carol, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. And we've touched on this before in terms of the collateral damage of the COVID crisis on so many other issues, from mental health to children's education. But in terms of the impact on cancer diagnoses, and we've seen this report this week on the diagnosis of breast cancer. I mean, this is hugely concerning, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, 1 million people, 1 million women. And, there are 3 screening programs at the NHS, one for breast cancer, one for colon cancer, and one for cervical cancer, cancer of the womb. And they've all been affected, but the breast one's been particularly affected because it was essentially cancelled. There was absolutely no reason to cancel it in many areas. People thought COVID would overwhelm the whole system. It didn't. It's gone away faster than we could imagine. In reality, there are less than 250 people on ventilators at the moment around the system. And it's a big system. There's a lot of people in Britain. So we should have gone back to breast screening a lot earlier, not leaving 1 million people undiagnosed.
And how quickly do you think now the catch-up process is going? In some, we hear about more money going into the system. We've got tax rises in April. Essentially to try and fund that extra. And yet we hear from the Health Secretary that the waiting lists are going to go up and up before they're going to get a lot worse before they get better. Does that include for diagnosis for things like breast cancer, or is the progress being made?
Progress is being made, but it's painfully slow, Richard. I suppose the real problem, and I've been a consultant for many, over 40 years, is the system works at capacity at the best of times. So there is no spare capacity, and that's equipment, scanners, mammograms, digital mammograms that we have everywhere, and of course staff. That's the other key problem. You just say you'd like to work at weekends. You'd like everyone to come in at weekends. Very difficult to actually implement. However much money you pay, it's difficult to keep things going. If we had the same attitude to cancer and the backlog, both diagnostic and treatment backlogs, as we did to COVID, we could do it. It would take 3 months to do it. Instead, we allow the waiting times to go up. The current estimate is we won't be back to normal till 2024 or 2025, which is ludicrous.
So when you say the backlog could be, we could get on top of that in 3 months, but that presumably requires a wholesale sort of mindset change in the way that the assets, the diagnostic equipment, the scanners, and indeed the operating theatres are used.
Exactly. And staff, I mean, there are a lot of very bright healthcare assistants that could actually work a diagnostic machine quite easily with a bit of training and with a supervision. And we've got to think of imaginative ways of operating the system and getting people to come in at weekends and in the evening, work till midnight. Patients don't mind when they come in. It's a pleasure to get a CT scan at 8 o'clock in the evening in London simply because you can drive and park your car at 8 in the evening. You
Absolutely.
Can't during the day. So.
And how much private healthcare capacity of diagnostics for cancer is being used by the NHS? You occasionally sort of hear that they are using some private sector capacity. In your experience in cancer, how much of that actually is happening as opposed to being talked about, and how much more could happen?
There's a lot of talk, and I run a private cancer network, and we're in talks, but the talks go on, and nothing really happens. And we've got about a month to clear some of this. Some of the people have been waiting 3 or 4 months. We know if you take breast cancer, the problem is if you wait 3 months, it goes from stage 1 to stage 2 or 3. The prognosis, the outcome drops from nearly 90% chance of cure to less than 30% chance.
But Carol, I'm a bit of an impatient guy. I can't stand waiting. And it seems to me that this is a case that, we shouldn't be talking, we should be doing. Not jaw. It should be a war on cancer.
Well, Boris came to one of our cancer centres about a month ago, and there was a bit of action. When the Prime Minister pitches up, you can imagine the whole entourage take action. Letters were written, an offer to involve the whole private sector in a blitz on cancer. Just let's get it done in 3 months and catch up. That's what we need to do, is to have some power, a willpower to actually try and do the catch up. Once that's done, we can go back to normal again.
And it's obviously... all cancers. If you're waiting months, then essentially the progression of the cancer, depending on what it is, the speed of it. It potentially is devastating and dramatically life-shortening. I just can't understand why that doesn't get done. Why people are talking.
I know. And the average age of a cancer patient is under 60. The average age of a COVID death was over 80. So, if you look at the life years lost, which I've been banging on about, instead of just the percentage of patients dying, COVID was relatively minor in terms of life years lost. Tragedy for patients, but relatively minor compared with the backlog for cancer, which is resulting in deaths of much younger people.
This is the key point, isn't it? That yes, every death is sad, but the death of someone in their 80s or 90s with COVID isn't a tragedy the way that someone dying in their 40s, 50s or 60s with a cancer that hasn't been diagnosed, that could have been diagnosed and treated because of bureaucratic incompetence.
Absolutely. And when final analysis comes, probably in 2 or 3 years, because it takes that time for cancer to really work out what's going on, we'll see that the number of cancer deaths probably outweighed the number of COVID deaths because of the shifting of the whole system towards COVID. It's coming to an end, but we're left with this massive backlog that we've got to deal with, both the acute backlog of cancer patients and the backlog of people just needing something from the NHS.
And how much talk is going on about reforms in the NHS in order to get on top of this? Or again, is it just talk and not real action? We hear it from politicians, but I want to know, is there any real action going on within the NHS itself in terms of reform?
I'm afraid it's mainly talk. No politician wants to touch the NHS. It's a losing battle for them because we're all so in love with it. It's got great features, but it's got real problems in terms of organisation and bureaucracy. We've got to overcome those. And general practice now, the way you get into it, how do you get an appointment? I had a friend of mine yesterday. He was told to come back in 16 weeks for his appointment. This is a actual cancer patient.
Carol, thank you so much indeed. That's Professor Karol Sikora with his views about the bureaucracy and the delays in screening and diagnosing breast cancers, amongst others. The system needs fundamental reform. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about much, much more about sanctions, various other issues, and also football clubs. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Morning Talk.
Sunday Talk.
Talk Radio.
Richard Tice.
Powered by Debate.
Sunday morning with the Tice Man. Richard Tice. The heart of a common sense Sunday.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are into the second hour, and that was a great chat with Professor Carol Sikora. And we've just had a tweet in from Christine in Bath, who says, absolutely, the NHS needs an overhaul. From personal experience, last night a cancer patient in an Essex hospital looked after by good nurses needed a doctor. There wasn't one available and still hasn't seen one. How is this okay? Well, I think that really is the point. There's so much good work, but so often equally there are shortages. Failing management in the NHS means that actually it just doesn't quite become as excellent as it really should be. And it's not as though we're not paying enough for it. The reality is we're paying about the average for OECD countries for our healthcare, and yet the reality is that our outcomes are simply not good enough. We've got another tweet that's come in here from Pete. Change of topic. Is there an equivalent of a vote of no confidence in the US to oust Biden and Harris? The world needs a leader, especially now with Putin threatening World War III. Pete, well, there is in the US, it's called impeachment, but it's a very high bar, and that certainly wouldn't be the case now. So the only other way of ousting, of course, is through democratic elections. We've got Cornelius, just quickly in Swansea. Hi there, Cornelius.
Morning, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. What would you like to say?
Well, to be honest, you read out an email, and it's distracting me a little bit from what I wanted to talk about in relation to a viewer.
Talk about what you wanted to talk about. Ignore my email.
No. When you said that the gentleman that wrote in an email to you saying that the EU and NATO has also got a place to play in relation to what's going on with the Ukraine. Well, obviously they have. The EU and NATO has purposely gone further east over the last 15, 14 years, getting right on the Russian border. You keep poking a bear with a big fat stick, he's gonna react. Now, what's happening in relation to what Putin is doing, obviously, is wrong. When you see war and people losing their lives, it is absolutely disgraceful. But you cannot dismiss what the EU and NATO have done over the last 10, 14 years.
No, it's a really good point, Cornelius, and there's a very different view on that. Let me put the counter view on that, which is it's interesting, isn't it, that where NATO has essentially adopted some of those Baltic states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, interesting that actually Putin hasn't gone into any of those states, has he? So actually, maybe he clearly is afraid of NATO. And the one state, of course, that hasn't been adopted by NATO, that has asked to be, Ukraine, that's the one state that he's gone in. So maybe actually NATO is acting as a deterrent. You can argue it both ways. There's no question, Cornelius. Are you still there? Might have lost you.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
That I'm putting the other side of the argument. And I do think that Putin is a different man to what he was 15 to 20 years ago.
Right. But also, are you still there?
I'm still here. Go for it.
Right. Also, you got to look at, okay, as somebody that listens to the radio, listen to the news, listen to what information you've given to us. During the Brexit vote, apparently Putin was involved, that he had influence in relation to the UK leaving the EU. According to America, Putin was involved with Trump with collusion in order for the election in 2016. All of it proven wrong. All of it proven wrong.
All a load of baseless rumours from all the evidence that I've read and heard about. Cornelius, thank you so much.
Can I just quickly say, right?
Go for it, quickly, because we've got to take my next guest.
Right. When Germany put their chest out talking about shutting down Nord Stream 2, it's called Nord Stream 2 because they got Nord Stream 1. no gas is being going through Nord Stream 2 because it hasn't been commissioned. Yet they're still having the gas coming into Europe and Germany from Nord Stream 1. So they haven't done nothing in relation to isolating gas coming into Europe from Germany, come from Russia. They've done nothing.
You're absolutely right. And of course, the main other gas lines that brings gas into Western Europe is, of course, through Ukraine. And transit fees get paid. And that was one of the things that actually Russia was trying to get around, to weaken the Ukrainian economy even further. Cornelius, thank you very much for that. And I'm delighted now to talk about the latest updates with regard to Ukraine by Bob Seeley, MP for the Isle of Wight and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Very good morning to you, Bob. So events moving very fast overnight, and yesterday we have got, it looks like, stronger sanctions now being agreed by the EU, which I was delighted to hear. I was a little bit grumpy, I have to be honest, that the likes of Germany and Italy were sort of dragging their feet on this. And that is good news, as long as they're imposed fast enough and properly enough. So I'll just get your thoughts on that before we talk about sort of what may be happening on the ground in Ukraine itself.
Okay, well, good morning, Richard. Good morning to your listeners. Well, clearly, deterrence hasn't worked thus far because the Russians are doing something that we all agree is very bad. They've invaded another country. I mean, Cornelius made some interesting points. I'm very happy to come back to that and try to answer that because it is a serious point, but I also don't think he was 100% correct. We've now got to learn. We've now got to get some sanctions in place that hurt, that bite, that maybe encourage Russians, maybe the elite around Putin, to persuade him maybe that there is an alternative. The problem is that Putin's court gets smaller and smaller, and I think he listens to fewer and fewer people, and that's potentially very dangerous, not only for Ukraine, but for the rest of us as well. I understand that some of these oligarch lawyers are trying to hold up some of these sanctions as much as possible, and I suspect that will be debated in the House of Commons, and people may give those opinions, their opinions, what they think of those lawyers, but let's see.
Indeed, and I think that actually the speed of the imposition of the sanctions is absolutely vital, as opposed to just talking about it. But I also think, I wonder who you've touched on the lawyers for the oligarchs. I wonder who they are. I mean, would serious UK legal firms still be willing to represent oligarchs in this situation, given everything that's going on? Is that a case of money talks over integrity and principle?
I think money is talked over integrity and principle for some people in dealing with Russia for many years, for at least a decade and a half, if not longer. I will be careful what I say, but we've said stuff in Parliament about this, and I think there is a very strong opinion forming amongst some that all these companies that have turned a blind eye have probably got to be quite mindful of their reputations in future. And certain individuals who've made an awful lot of money out of representing Russians, be in PR firms, former politicians, legal firms, finance firms, are going to have to think about which side of history they want to be seen on.
And are the legal imposition of sanctions preventing UK law firms, accountants and PR firms being able to act for these oligarchs? Is that something that could be considered?
I'm not so sure about that. What I think we absolutely need, and very frustratingly we don't have in this country, is a foreign lobbying law. The Americans have had one since 1938. It's called FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And the Australians got one in 2018, the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme Act, to guard against covert Chinese influence. And what we need a foreign lobbying law in this country. So at the very least, we know what all these law firms, the influence peddlers, the reputation managers, the PR companies, the finance firms do for the Russian state and the Russian state's proxy named actors, be they major firms or be they oligarchs. And there seems to have been some resistance, and we still don't have this Foreign Lobbying Act. And I think it is a great shame. And I think it is in our public interest to have that. And it concerns me that we don't.
And maybe something like that could be bolted onto what we've heard from, I think, the Home Secretary about an additional economic sanctions legislation that could be urgently introduced over the coming days.
Richard, the economic crime bill is going to have two things in it, which some people have been arguing for rightly for years. Firstly, you're going to have true beneficiaries of offshore trusts. So you can't have an offshore trust and say it's for the beneficiary of account number 1 through 3. You've got to say who owns that. And I think that's going to be interesting for an awful lot of people.
And how quickly will that be imposed? I mean, will that be rushed through in a matter of days through both houses?
Well, let's see, because I think the government's going to present this bill. The government was going to put it in, that it was put off, and then it was going to be in the next session of Parliament. And now, as of last week, it's going to be presented this week, and I hope on Monday. So it's going to have that, and it's also going to have in greater transparency for Companies House. And for those people who are listening to you, Richard, and are saying, well, why didn't we do this 20 years ago? They ask a very, very good question for which I don't have an adequate answer.
But my view is it's never too late. Just before you go, Bob, in terms of what's going on in the ground, obviously in Ukraine, very fast moving, it does sound as though Russian troops may be finding the going harder than their leaders expected. Is there a danger that Western media may be, in a sense, imposing some sort of optimism bias on that?
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good point, because if you look at the Russian media, as I was reading yesterday, they have a very different line. There may be much more optimism bias on the Russian side, because clearly that's propaganda. I do think people are trying to present the Ukrainians as being heroic, and frankly they are. I mean, I lived in Ukraine from 1990 to 94, and they are very stoical people, and once they're slow to anger, but once they do, they really kick off. And I think it's going to be difficult now for the Russians, more difficult than they imagined, and they will have to use overwhelming preponderance of heavy arms, so tanks and artillery and air power. But the real problem they're going to have is once they're in situ, the Molotov cocktails, the RPGs, the rocket-propelled grenades, and actually just the sheer anger of the population who are going to be screaming abuse at them. The old grannies and the old men who are saying, what on earth, or rather ruder, a lot of this content, what on earth are you doing out in our country? Soldiers want to be heroes. They don't want to be seen with the enemy.
A sort of long-term insurgency could be much more damaging for Putin.
It's not insurgency, Afghan style or Chechen style. There will be some of that. There will be small arms attacks in future, I'm sure, RPGs, anti-tank. But a lot of them, what's going to really hurt the morale is the abuse they're going to get from unarmed civilians who they're going to have to deal with. And it's the combination of attacks at night and the abuse that unarmed civilians are going to give them during the day, that it's going to hit their cohesion, it's going to hit their desertion rates. It may be, once you get pictures of these Russian troops reacting very badly to civilian populations and shooting on them, I just think that at that point you begin to get a truly corrosive effect in Russia itself.
Sure. Bob, thank you so much for those thoughts. That's Bob Seeley, the Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight, and also a member of the Foreign Select Committee, with his thoughts about both the sanctions and also what may be going on the ground. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the impact of all of this on the world of football clubs, ownership of football clubs, with Sean Custis, the head of sport at The Sun. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
At last, a radio station that's on your side.
Arm yourself with knowledge.
Listen or don't listen.
Wide Angle Radio.
Let's broaden our minds.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Now on the telly.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, into our second hour. And of course, we've been talking matters Ukraine. Keep those calls coming in 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts, your questions, your views. And of course, the world of football is a really significant element of this crisis. We've already seen the Champions League final being moved from St. Petersburg to Paris. We saw extraordinary scenes, emotional scenes yesterday at Goodison Park between the Ukrainian players on opposing sides. And we've got the cup final today at Wembley between Chelsea and Liverpool. And the news yesterday that the owner of Chelsea, Roman Abramovich, who has allegedly got close links to Putin, that he's put it into the ownership of that into some form of trusteeship. I actually am not sure that is enough. But I want to discuss this further now with the head of sport at The Sun, who's joined me in the studio kindly, Sean Custis. Good morning to you. Football is such a massive, massive part of all of our lives here in the UK and around the world. And in a sense, there's hardly a bigger name than Chelsea. And
the world champions,
obviously ownership by Roman Abramovich. I mean, this must be a really, really difficult time for Chelsea fans, the players, and the manager with everything that's going on.
People always try to say that sport and politics shouldn't mix, and it's absolutely impossible in cases like this. But I think for Chelsea players and the manager, it's a very, very difficult situation today. I mean, don't get me wrong, nothing like being in a war in Ukraine, which is absolutely horrendous. But Thomas Tuchel laid on the line a bit on Friday, saying how horrible it was. He's also said that he'd happily not win this cup if it meant the end to the war. He suggested that, how do you react if you score a goal? Were they to win the trophy? Because these pictures are going to be played out all over the world, Chelsea playing Liverpool, and there's a stance they sort of have to adopt today. They can't be seen to celebrate wildly were they to win that cup.
That's right.
And equally, strangely, I think, were they to lose, I don't think they could look almost downcast, you think, because it's what has football victory or defeat matter.
And I'm conflicted myself because many of my listeners, I think, know that I'm a Liverpool fan, but I just think it is almost an impossible situation for everybody involved. And where does this go from here? As you say, these pictures, we don't know how long, the actual sort of this is going to go on. It could be weeks, it could be months.
Well, interesting, the Chelsea Charitable Trust, who've been given the stewardship of Chelsea, don't seem to know either exactly what it means. You've got some quite bright people on there in football. Bruce Buck, who's been the chairman of Chelsea for a long time. Emma Hayes, the manager of the Chelsea women's team, is involved in it, and they're seeking clarification as to what it means, because to a lot of us it seems cosmetic that Abramovich is trying to prevent the authorities from taking Chelsea off him, or at least freezing the assets of the club, because there is an argument that were he to be sanctioned, that even just paying to get into Chelsea means that you're paying Abramovich, in effect, putting money into his coffers, and obviously nobody wants that. But to all intents and purposes, this club carries on in the way it always has carried on, because he's still the owner. One thing I'd say, you're probably not going to see 97 million pound bids for strikers in the summer, because he won't be able to mobilise that money. And equally, what sort of luck would that be?
And of course, for the trustees, I mean, unless Chelsea is cash generative, which I suspect it's not, then there's the question of where the money comes from. It's hard to see actually how it can't, whether it's by freezing the assets or whether the trustees, that essentially Chelsea could be sold really quite quickly.
Well, Chelsea could be sold if if Abramovich wants to sell it, and B, the asking price has always been around £3 billion. Now, if he sells Chelsea, does that generate money for him? If he's sanctioned, he can't presumably sell Chelsea, then it's stuck. There's been questions about whether he'd call in a loan of £1.5 billion, but he has always said in the past that, well, he's virtually written them off. That they're in fact loans to himself. So, and he would have no wish to bankrupt a club which he has built up over 19 years and is one of the dominant forces in the world of football. I can't see that.
It's massive questions around the ownership and, as you say, the sort of direction of travel of funds. Just more broadly, Sean, where does this leave big questions like Russia's participation in the World Cup?
I don't see how they can. I mean, the likes of Poland, Czech Republic have already voiced their objections to playing against Russia. Initially we had these trite suggestions like, we'll have to play the playoffs on a neutral ground. Well, players don't want to play against them. They're not the least bit interested in being on the same pitch as Russian footballers. They're just not going to do it. I would say they have no option but to withdraw.
And in a sense, what you may actually be seeing is a sort of player power, really.
Absolutely.
More than anything.
I think we've seen a lot of that in the last 2 days. I mean, the scenes at Everton Man City yesterday were they were very touching scenes.
They
and
really
the way the fans have rallied around, and football fans in general, right behind Ukraine. Again, pictures which resonate around the world. Sport can be very, very powerful at times, and in this case, it really has proven to be so.
It really could be, and actually, it could be almost more powerful than ever. Because, I mean, we all know football fans are hugely passionate for their clubs, but also very patriotic for their country.
Absolutely, and Trump said patriotism for your club. I mean, I was seeing a couple of posts this morning from Chelsea fans going, "Come on, the Chelsea, big game today," and people actually saying, "Really? Yeah. In the scheme of things, is it really big? Does it really matter? Does it count for anything?" I think we want to see today that sport is understanding the world situation, which I'm sure it will show, and that actually whoever wins doesn't really matter.
Yeah, which is it's almost impossible to believe that is the case, and how the fans react, how the players react. Every player wants to score a cup final winning goal.
No, I think they're in a tricky position. But again, we have to keep saying it's nothing compared to the position the people of Ukraine are in. Very proud people fighting for their country, and I think all the footballers understand that. They all have teammates or know of people who have teammates who played for Ukraine. Who played for Dynamo Kiev, for instance, which is a very proud football club, which I've been there many, many times. It's a country which loves its football, and people understand that around the world of football. They have, as I say, many friends who play in those teams.
And that World Cup decision about Russia's participation, who makes that decision? That's a FIFA decision.
That is a FIFA decision, but Infantino, who's the boss of FIFA, has been seen rather to be, let's not say in Putin's camp, but soft on him. Over the years, so whether he'll have the chutzpah, if you like, to chuck them out, but I'm not sure. But the pressure will become so much that there's no way they can possibly play in this playoff game.
And they I think they need to be seen to act quickly and promptly. This is all about ramping up the pressure on Putin and the Russian authorities.
It's a decision which has to be made in the next couple of days. It can't go on. It can't be left to drag on. They have to be kicked out.
That's right. Well, it'll be very interesting because I'm not sure that FIFA's got a great track record of making prompt, big decisions. Sean, thank you so much indeed. That was Sean Custis, the head of sport at The Sun, about the implications for the world of football in terms of what's going on in Ukraine, how difficult it is for the clubs, the ownership of the clubs. That may need to change with the ownership of Chelsea, and the players. How do they react at this difficult time in such a big game at Wembley? How do the Liverpool players respond, and the fans? I think it's an extraordinary situation. Give us a call 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts. Are you a Chelsea fan? How would you react? Does it matter to you, or is it all about winning? I want to hear your thoughts, your views, or tweet us at Talk Radio, and we can take those tweets. Here's a tweet that's come in from Joanne. That's interesting, slightly different topic. I honestly feel sorry for you, Richard. If you actually believe a woman could phone up the NHS right now thinking she had breast cancer and anyone would answer the phone and be interested, well, look, whether the phone's answered or not, I think it should be. And I think we pay a lot for NHS. We value what is done, but we want the best NHS. We want the best healthcare, an excellent healthcare system. We know with reform, it can do better and better. Give us a call. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Common Sense Radio for common sense people.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is a glorious, bright blue sky out there, an amazing Sunday morning, and we've been talking obviously about Ukraine, but also the impact, for example, just then on the world of football. Keep those calls and tweets coming in 0344 499 1000 or tweet us at Talk Radio. We've got a text message that's come in here about my Sunday sermon at the beginning. So much that we buy has been made in China. If we stop buying these goods, presumably it would hurt China, and therefore they wouldn't want to fall out with the UK. I've been saying it's wrong to manufacture so much abroad for decades. And of course, that's why the text goes on, why they need so many coal-fired power stations to produce goods for us. Well, that is a very interesting point of view. But of course, it's not just the UK. Much of the West buys cheap manufactured goods from China. And that is how, actually, they've made us dependent on China. That is their economic power. We're talking of power and the question of what we can do about the Ukrainian situation and the pressure that can be put onto Putin and the Russian leadership. I'm delighted now to be joined by Bill Browder, who's head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, and who spent a lot of time in Russia and understands how the Russian leadership thinks. Bill, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining Tice Talk this Sunday morning. So, I mean, what's happened this week, I didn't expect it, many did, utterly horrendous. And in a sense, Putin's played on our weakness. When we last spoke a few weeks back, you said that we had to impose sanctions on oligarchs immediately, and of course that didn't happen. To what extent do you think now the recent noises over the last couple of days, is that going to be enough, or is it just a step in the right direction?
So the answer is that when we first had the conversation a few weeks ago, I was calling for sanctions on Putin and Putin's money by going after the oligarchs. It wasn't done. And then on last Tuesday, the first sanctions were issued. They were totally inadequate. By Thursday, a new sanctions program was put in place. And I would say that we went from like a 2 out of 10 from Tuesday to an 8 out of 10 on Thursday. On Friday, they announced that Vladimir Putin himself would be sanctioned. I think that got us to a 9 out of 10. And now a task force is being set up by the UK, the US, Canada, and other governments to hunt down oligarchs' money. And so I would say that we're now at a 10 out of 10 in terms of economic sanctions against Putin. Now, what happens next is very important. It's one thing to announce these programs, and it's another thing to enforce these programs. And I've seen with my own eyes over a long period of time how inadequate British law enforcement is when it comes to going after Russian oligarchs. And so this is really the where the rubber meets the road. The government policy is now correct. Now it's the government implementation.
Well, that's interesting. I'm encouraged you think it's as good as 10 out of 10 in terms of the talking the talk. And yes, now it's actually about the enforcement and the delivery and the speed with which that can be done. And also then, Bill, who essentially acts for the oligarchs in trying to protect their position? I touched earlier in the show with the MP Bob Seeley about the lawyers, the accountants, the PR firms, the financiers in and around the City of London, whether or not they credibly can still act for these people, or whether legally or morally they will stop acting for them.
Well, I mean, that is a true crucial question. The enablers have been the ones who have allowed the Russians to infiltrate our society over the last 20 years, and they're the sort of bulwark of the oligarchs now. I've been contacted by government officials in a number of different countries about this very issue over the last 24 hours. And my suggestion to them, and I'll suggest it here, and hopefully a lot of other people will hear it, is that there should be some type of law or regulation passed which requires British financial institutions, British accountants, real estate agents, and others to disclose if they hold any or have been involved in structuring any Russian asset protection schemes, and provide that information to the government with the penalty of massive fines and imprisonment if they don't. And I think that would probably, so the government doesn't have the resources to go after all these people, but I think they can crowdsource it quite easily, because the same people who enabled this should be the ones who come clean now, and at the cost of real tough consequences if they don't.
That's right. And actually, Bob Seeley himself was talking about possibly something very similar, sort of almost like the American Foreign Lobbying Act. And that there is a new legislation likely to be tabled in the House of Commons over the next couple of days, and whether or not that can be added to it. And even if it's not done legally, I actually think morally the pressure on these, essentially the top partners at these firms, they are, they're quite senior figures within the British establishment.
Yeah.
And I mean, morally, they should refuse to act, even if the legal position isn't yet clarified.
Don't hold your breath. These are people. I mean, truly. I mean, I've been up against them. They've been, these, people who went to all the same schools and all the same clubs and in the same neighborhoods, and the kids go to the same, football on the Saturday and so on. These people, they take the Russian money, very happy to take the Russian money, and they hold their heads high without any moral, discomfort. It's don't let that. If we're going to rely on that, it ain't going to happen. There has to be.
I mean, that in itself is deeply, deeply depressing, given everything that's happened.
It is, and in fact, I find it more infuriating in a certain way, the enablers, the Russian enablers here in the UK and the US and other places, than I do the Putin regime itself. The Putin regime, the guys in the Putin regime are monsters, but they grew up in a monstrous society where they're all practically killing each other in kindergarten. And so, whatever gentle behavior and morality and decency was like beaten out of them at an early age. But the ones here who are helping them, they've all been they didn't grow up with that kind of distress and psychological damage. These are people who are making very calm, considered decisions to betray this country and betray good behavior to make money. And those are the really nasty pieces of work that we should shun any way we can.
Yeah, that's right. And if they won't do it morally, then hopefully promptly, then laws can be put in place and added to that bill that may go through the House of Parliament over the coming days. Just finally, Bill, how much pressure do you think may emerge in Russia from the population? We've seen some protests on the street and lots of people being arrested. But given the sort of the economic sanctions that hopefully will actually be imposed rather than just talked about, are you hopeful that pressure may grow on Putin to change course, or do you think that's again too optimistic?
Well, I think that there's a lot of people that are very unhappy in Russia from a lot of different perspectives. I mean, there's been a lot of images of demonstrations around Russia, and being a demonstrator in Russia is an extremely dangerous thing. You go to jail for demonstrating. So a lot of people demonstrating. And then you've got this situation where like there's long lines early this morning in Moscow of everybody trying to take their money out of the bank because they're worried about the SWIFT banking system making their money inaccessible. And then you have the oligarchs now who are going to have their money frozen. And then you have all the sanctions on the state banks and so on. And so there's a lot of different places, a lot of different pressure or people being unhappy. But you should understand that Russia is not a democracy. Vladimir Putin, it doesn't have to win the hearts and minds of the people. All he has to do is either scare them or distract them. And so he arrests them to scare them, and he distracts them with this war. And he's also a guy who's not he's not influenced. He doesn't get cowed or intimidated by anything. The more bad stuff that comes his way, the more he ratchets up. And so we shouldn't in any way underestimate how ugly, how long, and how painful this whole thing is going to be for us, for the Ukrainians, and for the Russian people.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I've described it that imposing these level of sanctions and things, there'll be short-term pain that will essentially occur here in the UK, and that we will have to accept, and people in the West will have to accept, in order for the medium-term gain, ultimately, of hopefully having regime change in Russia. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And it's more than just regime change in Russia. I'm not even sure if we'll get regime change in Russia, but what we need to do is create such a penalty to Vladimir Putin that he doesn't even think about going to the next step. Because believe me, this is not ending in Ukraine. If he was able to like flatten Ukraine and move on, he will be at NATO's door, and he's going to then test out whether we're ready to go to war with Russia over Estonia. That's his ultimate goal. And so we have to stop him a long way from getting there. And the Ukrainians are doing us such a brave service right now to fight him off, because
they absolutely are. They absolutely are, Bill. And we must give them all the support we can. Bill, I've got to go to a break, but thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Bill Browder, who was the head of the Magnitsky Global Justice Campaign, and who spent a long time doing business in Russia, understanding what may be going on in Putin's thinking amongst the leadership within Russia. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts, your views and your questions on this topic or anything else. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk and Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. Accept no substitutes.
Access all arguments.
The UK's official opinion exchange.
Free Speech Radio.
Shut up and listen.
We're on your side.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio!
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are approaching the end of the second hour. It's still an amazing morning out there. Lots of tweets coming in about the NHS from my discussion with Professor Carol Sikora. One here from Christina who says, I find it baffling that those shouting the loudest about protecting the NHS won't even consider looking into where the money is spent and why there is so much wastage. Another one here from Neil who says, I agree, an overhaul of the NHS is long overdue. It's become bloated with unnecessary management, very poor procurement systems. God knows what the financial cost of the waste is that obviously exists within the NHS. So some interesting thoughts there. I think agreeing with me that actually you can be delivering great frontline care, really determined, hardworking nurses and doctors doing their best. But if the management systems aren't good enough, if there's too much waste and bureaucracy, and some things are just too difficult, then actually the overall care is too slow and it results in too much wastage. Let's take your calls now. Keep them coming, 0344 499 1000. Carl is in Pinner in London. Good morning, Carl.
Good morning, sir. Now, you'll have to excuse my ignorance on this, but throughout the whole of the covering of the attack in the Ukraine, I've not heard one attack from Ukraine on Russian military bases, and I don't know, but they've got an air force. Surely they will retaliate and try and ground as many Russian aircraft as possible, or send missiles into military bases. But I've not heard of one yet. Not even one.
You're saying should Ukraine, should they actually be attacking Russian assets, I think you're saying, in Russia itself, as opposed to just defending themselves? Is that really your question then, Carl?
That's what I mean. I'm sorry, I'm completely ignorant.
It's a really good question.
Know better than I do.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the simple answer is I don't know either. And of course, with war reporting, it's very hard to know exactly what is going on the ground. Even with smartphones and social media and stuff. It's hard to know, and I guess
through the media, I watch all media channels, and I've not seen Ukraine have made one strike against the Russian military in Russia.
No, that's right. Do you know, it's a great question. I haven't seen that either. We've heard about the Ukrainian armed forces imposing real damage on columns of tanks and armoured vehicles
actually coming into
Ukraine. But equally, Carl, it may be
I've not heard of one strike from the Ukrainians
into Russia,
military bases in Russia, and I can't understand why.
Well, and that's right, and that may be a deliberate decision from the Ukrainian leadership that they want to defend Ukraine in their own sovereign territory. It's a great question, Carl.
Maybe one of your listeners can enlighten me on it, because as I say, I'm completely ignorant of why.
Well, let's put that call out. If anybody else has got any views on that, any experience, then give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Carl, thank you very much for that. We're going to head up north to York, where Mike is. Is it lovely and sunny in York as well this morning, Mike?
It's always beautiful in paradise. Yeah. Before I mention what I was going to make, can I help that gentleman out, though, and give him the reason?
Go for it.
Okay. The Ukraine used to have nuclear missiles, but through the various agreements and treaties, they did away with all the weapons of retaliation. Consequently, they're naked.
So you're saying that actually they haven't got the missile defences to be able to carry out attacks onto Russian soil?
Got it. They surrendered everything in the name of peace. And, CND's jumping up and down and everybody's happy.
And look where it's got them. Well, certainly,
that's what got them.
It was certainly since essentially Russian-backed militia took over the Crimea in East Ukraine, there has been a significant retraining, gearing up and rearming of the Ukrainian military, but I think it probably is right that actually they haven't got the military hardware that's necessary, because of course that's why, in a sense, the UK actually has been has donated them some weapon systems, some anti-tank systems, as have other NATO states.
That's true, and the other thing, of course, it takes 2 to 3 years at least to train a tank crew. It's not something that you jump in a bit of metal and off you go, you know. And the other thing is the UK has got 250 battle tanks. Challenger 3 are coming along, but we've got 250. If you look at the NATO audit of 2014 to 2021, only 10 countries out of the 29 countries in NATO have actually met their obligations to pay 2% of their GDP into NATO. Germany, 1.5%. Absolute scandalous. They haven't got the if you like, the munitions. They haven't got the hardware. And we're talking about 250 British battle tanks. What I don't know, and perhaps somebody can help me out, is the latest armoured personnel vehicle, the Ajax, is destined for the scrap heap as soon as it comes off the production line. It's rubbish. And they're still using 20, 30-year-old warriors.
I mean, there's no question that, as you say, many NATO countries have not been meeting their obligations. And of course, it was President Trump, actually, who
Correct.
He essentially thumped loudest on the table and said that people should pay up, in particular Germany, who have been for many, many years essentially not contributing their bit, not doing their bit. And actually, of course, they're one of the countries that can most afford to with their very low debt levels.
Can I mention a more frightening part is Russia has also been doing live firing in the North Atlantic. Now, Republic of Ireland hasn't got an army, hasn't got a navy, really.
No, that's right.
And the frightening thing is for all Boris's rhetoric, all his rhetoric, the people in Northern Ireland have got an occupating government from Brussels that they never voted for.
No,
so
that's
if there's
right.
any problems that side of the Atlantic, who's going to start talking about protection and retaliation? Not Boris, because he'd have to go to Europe first of all and ask them.
Well, let's see. Whilst we've been talking, Mike, a tweet has just come in from Ash, who says, I read the Ukrainians have made some strikes on Russian air bases in the Rostov region. So, again, I think it's such a fast-moving situation, we never quite know. But, Mike, thank you for your thoughts. That was Mike in York. And we're going to head down to the southwest, to Exeter, where Susan is. And I'm sure it's beautiful down in Exeter this morning, Susan.
Yes, good morning, Richard. It's lovely and sunny, and it's cheering us up, isn't it?
Yes.
Well,
what would you like to say?
To a point, I'd like to say, as I understand, Putin has pulled back a little bit from Kiev. Is that right? He hasn't moved very far, has he?
Well, I think there's big question marks about that.
Yeah.
There is suggestions that he hasn't, his forces haven't made the ground that they hope to make in the first few days, but I think we've got to be slightly careful about interpreting it.
Well, I think, looking at Putin, examining his behaviour and bearing in mind that he's committed an act of extreme unlawfulness by entering Ukraine by force anyway, I think he's holding back a little bit, Richard, to bolster up his forces, drag some more, quite a lot more soldiers into his battalion down there, just outside Kiev, bolster up his arms and artillery, and then make a huge launch into Kiev. I don't think he's going to stop where he is. He's entered that country with the sole intention of taking the whole of it. He doesn't. He's as a gentleman said earlier, who was talking to you. He doesn't care how bloody this war gets. He doesn't care that little children, innocent people, have indeed lost their lives, and more are bound to do so. He cares. Sorry, Richard?
I think you're right. He doesn't care because that is the inevitable consequence of attack, of war. So he clearly doesn't care. You're right, Susan.
No, But I think also, Richard, I would like to see, I think as we all have learned, the Ukrainian soldiers, the armed forces, have done a terrific job so far. They have defended their country to the hilt. Haven't they? They've been wonderful.
You're right, Susan. Thank you so much for that. There's no question that they are fighting hard, and that I think the level of defence by the Ukrainian, not only the armed forces, but also citizens doing their bit, taking out arms, means that I think Putin is being surprised. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts, your questions. Stay with us into the third hour. We're going to be talking about domestic matter of what's going on. There's a tube strike for 2 days this week at this time. Unbelievable. Give us a call. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Mid-morning talk.
Sunday talk.
Talk radio. Take a chance with the Tice Man.
Talk Radio. Richard Tice. Sunday morning devotion, there isn't a sermon.
Talk Radio's Common Sense Weekend.
Richard Tice
on Talk Radio.
Welcome back and good afternoon. Welcome to Tice Talk in the third hour of my show. We've obviously been focusing on Ukraine, lots of thoughts and questions and discussion about that. We've got a text that's just come in here from Mike about the question as to whether or not Ukrainians have actually been attacking Russian air bases. And this tweet says, part of the conflict is the narrative war. Putin says he's defending Russia. Nonsense, as we know. If Ukraine attacks Russia, then hang on, that's just moved around. If Ukraine attacks Russia, it plays into Putin's fake narrative, whereas Ukraine is acting in defense. We don't want to give Putin the opportunity to claim that fake narrative. And that's from Mike. A very good point, actually, about that. And Ukraine essentially is defending itself as an independent sovereign nation. Well, coming back here into the UK and indeed to London, it seems that there are 2 days of complete all-out strikes going to take place on the tube part of Transport for London this week, I think on Wednesday and Friday. And it feels to me that, there's never a good time for a strike, particularly for a piece of our critical national infrastructure such as the tube. But we need to understand what's going on here, why is this strike likely to take place, and what's it all about? And there's no better person to discuss this with than a representative from one of the key unions involved, John Leach, who is the London Transport Regional Organiser for the RMT union, therefore joins me to discuss this. Good afternoon, John. So what's going on here? There's never a good time to strike. We're coming out of the COVID crisis. We're trying to get people back into city centres to get the economy going again. And we've got 2 days of all-out strikes that is just going to, in a sense, disadvantage Londoners and the London economy.
Absolutely, and it's the last thing, of course, our members, the men and women, fantastic tube staff want to be doing. Just put you right on the dates. It's Tuesday and Thursday this week coming, but nevertheless, to answer your question directly, these are the people that have kept London moving during the pandemic. Like everyone else, they've lost loved ones. Some of them have died themselves, and they're now being told they've got to pay the price for the absolute financial chaos that TfL finds itself in its shenanigans with the government, trying to find money to take the way forward. And the company have come forward with a plan which is a wholesale attack on their pensions, job numbers, and their conditions of employment. We've been trying for weeks and weeks to shake some sense into them and talk to them, plead with them, explain to them why this isn't right.
So
we're a trade union, and at the end of the day, we've had to stand up and we've got to try and do something about it.
But what exactly, in terms of jobs and conditions, do you think is going on? Because from what I read and have learned, Transport for London have said that there would be no compulsory job cuts, but it would be through what's called natural wastage, that as people either retire or voluntarily choose to leave. So, that's fairly normal business practice, isn't it?
If it was only as simple as that, I don't think we would be at the point of where we've got to. But let me just give you some very straightforward figures. They've already announced the abolition of 600 positions on the stations, frontline uniform staff. It's going to save them 25 million quid. They told us themselves at ACAS last week they've got to save another £314 million. And no stone's been left unturned. On pensions, they've told us they want to save £100 million a year off the pension budget, and that's why they're undertaking a review.
So that's a condition, isn't it, of the government essentially continuing to support TfL. There's a review of the pension scheme.
Well, we wouldn't mind a review, an open-ended review. We can look at things. Of course we can. Things need to be reviewed. But there's a front-loaded commitment to save £100 million every year off of it. It's over a third of the cost of it.
The challenge here, John, is that essentially TfL is bust because of COVID. I mean, that we all know, and it's a question of how it's going to be funded for the long term, isn't it? And I mean, on the pension scheme, when you say you're happy with the concept of a review, obviously, like many public sector schemes, it's a defined benefit scheme, which is relative to the private sector, incredibly generous already.
It's a fair pension scheme for people who generally spend their entire working lives doing a very tough job, and it's what everyone should have, I think. What I would say is the pension is actually in very good condition. The trustees, including the management trustees of it, have all just given it a double thumbs up, and it's in very good health. What we've got is an ideological agenda here about that pension. But, you know, it's absolute tragedy that it's come to this, that the political football between the Mayor of London and the government about tube finance. What the government should do is fund TfL properly, and the Mayor should deliver that by investing in his staff, investing in the infrastructure, and giving the people of London the tube network they need. But we're a trade union, and we've had to do what, at the end of the day, we need to do, which is to stand up and be counted, and just not allow our jobs, our pensions, and our conditions to be the price for this. You know, and I think that's not too much to ask, to be honest.
Well, I guess the question is, but you don't have to strike. You could carry on talking. I mean, they're not actually, as we understand, they're not actually saying the jobs are being cut against the will of employees. They're saying that when there's natural wastage, when someone retires or goes to a different job, that it may not be replaced. I mean, what's the harm in that, John?
Well, I mean, we went to ACAS last week, and we'll be meeting London Underground hopefully tomorrow morning again, one last chance. And we've said to them, we could suspend this strike action. All they've got to do is give us a commitment on the jobs, on the pensions, and on the agreements. But, you know, what they're saying to us is, we can't do that. We can't give you any kind of commitments on anything. And, you know, we've been in meetings for weeks and weeks with them. The job cuts are on the table. The pension cuts are there. It's £100 million. Everyone knows what's coming our way. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell the people of London, we just can't stand for that. And we think the people of London will get that. We understand the inconvenience. We're not naive. But we also know we're a trade union.
But
we'll always stand by our members.
I get that, but most people in London don't have the benefit of, don't enjoy a defined benefit scheme if you work in the private sector or for charities or whatever. You know, most people don't have that. So you've already got an incredibly fantastic pension scheme.
It's a good pension scheme. It's not a lottery win. It's what people pay into and the employer pays into, and it's based on your final year's salary when you're at work doing the job you used to do. Everyone should have a pension like that in the private or public sector. I'm campaigning right now for tube cleaners who are completely privatised to be given a decent pension. You're right. Pensions have been systematically undermined and dismantled. And we're just not going to allow that to happen to the tube staff. And, you know, I would implore the government and the mayor, stand by the people who kept London moving in the pandemic, and will continue to do so after these strikes, and we will deliver. But what we can't do is put on the bonfire to pay for the chaos of tube finance and an agenda. I mean, the government could write this off. Like they're writing off debt elsewhere for the pandemic.
But John, it's all our money. I mean, the government doesn't have money. It's our money. It's taxpayers' cash, and we've got a situation where we know that the numbers across the whole of TfL, not just the tube, of course, but with people working from home, the number of the passengers may never recover to pre-pandemic levels. So the finances of TfL are clearly in a shocking state, and in a sense are going to have to be subject to a major review themselves, and things are going to have to change, and in a sense everybody's got to accept that, haven't they?
We deliver change. We negotiate change. My union's been in London Underground for over 120 years, one way or the other. We deliver new technology. We deliver the train service. But what we're not going to deliver on a plate are the staff pension schemes, hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and also people's conditions of employment. What the tube management and the government need to do is take a step back, give us the commitment that they won't impose all these changes, Tell us that our pensions are safe and our jobs and our conditions are, and we can continue to do what needs to be done. And we will always talk
so
about
if you have these 2 days strikes and then nothing changes, are you saying there'll be more strikes, John?
Potentially, but I pray and hope that won't be the case. I would hope that they would listen to the tube staff and the and who are career men and women who do a fantastic job.
But only about 50% of members voted in this vote, so the other 50% presumably think it's okay.
No, I don't accept that. It was a 94% yes vote of those who voted.
Yeah, which was, but only 50%, only 50% have voted.
I tell you what, anyone who was in a parliamentary election or a mayoral election would be very, very pleased with those results. They passed the legal threshold well and truly. What we've got is a union standing up for its members. We don't want to be on strike.
No, I get
we
that.
kept London moving in the pandemic.
Yeah, no, John, I get that.
We'll continue to do so.
That is your job as a union.
It's just not fair for the pension to be put up.
Well, my plea to you, John, is it's not fair on Londoners to put us through the pain, the grief and the angst of 2 days of tube strikes this week and then potential more ones in the future.
The last thing we want, the tube staff have been keeping London moving for the last 2 years and beforehand. We haven't had London-wide strikes actually for 7 years. We don't like doing it. We like doing the job, but we're just not going to stand by and have our pensions, jobs and conditions picked off.
John,
simple as that.
I hear your message. That's the job you're paid to do. I get it. But on behalf of Londoners, my plea to you and your members is please think again. We don't need more pain. That's John Leach, the regional organiser for the RMT Union for London Transport. And I'm afraid it sounds like we've got 2 days of pain on Tuesday and Thursday here in London this week. I think that's the wrong course of action. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Tell us what you think. Is John Leach right on behalf of the union members, or actually we Londoners? Are we right to say they shouldn't strike? 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Richard Tice
on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. Powered by common sense. Activated by opinion.
The voice of reason.
In search of the perfect debate.
Free Speech Radio.
On the app, on your smart speaker, and on the money. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the third hour, and that discussion with John Leach, the trade union representative, has certainly got people going. And Marie says, I come to London to attend Moorfields for testing as I'm certified visually impaired. I'll have to get a taxi now because of their strike, and therefore that presumably means pay lots more money. Whereas Joanne says, tell that bloke from the rail union, we'll have hundreds of Ukrainians here soon. They'll be willing to work for much less than the union members. There we go. A few other thoughts I'll get back to a bit later from you in respect of that union discussion. And I think the appalling decision to go on strike 2 days this week on the Tube on Tuesday and Thursday. We've now got a caller here from Powell, who is on his way to the airport. I think Powell is Ukrainian, and he is trying to get back to Ukraine in order to help his country, to help his fellow citizens defend themselves, friends and family in Ukraine. Powell, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for calling in to Talk Radio. So what's your situation?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Tell us what your plans are.
Sorry, so just to make something clear, I'm not Ukrainian, I'm Polish. I live in Poland, close to the Ukrainian border. That's where my mom lives at the moment. I'm now traveling to Poland, and I'm going to go to Ukraine to help with evacuation of people from Ukraine to Poland. Poland has accepted and is accepting all the refugees that are coming from Ukraine. 110,000 people crossed in the last 3 days. Everyone is allowed to come in. Women, men, women, children, and elderly, because men between 18 and 60 are not allowed to leave Ukraine.
That's
right.
That's
a Ukrainian government decision. But they wouldn't leave anyway. They would stay and fight.
So you're looking to help people on the border, or are you actually looking to go into Ukraine to help Ukrainian men fight against the Russians, Powell?
No, I'll be going to Ukraine to help with the evacuation of people from there. There are plenty of people who need to be delivered to the Polish border. On the Polish border, there are hundreds of Polish cars just waiting to pick up people. There are buses crossing, and people are then receiving them and driving them either to the family members in Poland, or people offered their houses. My mom offered her flat for 2 people that can stay there. Hotels are offering, shelters.
Extraordinary. So communities in Poland are really coming together to help these refugees.
Yes.
I mean, you obviously, very, very close to this situation. What sort of numbers are potentially being talked about that of refugees, women, children, and the elderly that may be coming across that Polish border over the next weeks and months, do you think?
1 million to 4 million is expected to come over in the coming weeks.
Wow, 1 million to 4 million. I mean, that is an absolutely huge number, and presumably, if anything like that is right, then there's obviously going to have to be just a massive humanitarian effort in Poland, and then the question is whether people stay in Poland short term before returning to Ukraine, or are essentially moved to other countries that take a share.
Well, if we beat the Russians back, they will not have to go anywhere. They will want to go back to their homes. So this is something that we can all do. Here in Britain, people can help. Look, everyone knows either someone Ukrainian, and everyone in UK knows a Polish person. So ask them to find you a local charity, a Polish charity that is helping with the evacuation, helping with the refugees. There are plenty of fundraisers, legitimate ones. And any Polish person that you will ask, they will go on Google and they will find you Polish charities that need money. There are blankets needed in Poland, clothing, bedding. These people come over, with nothing.
That's right. I mean,
women, children, and elderly.
And as you say, essentially, we don't know how long, but that these people will, of course, want to return to their country, return to Ukraine when the situation is resolved, and hopefully that the Russian forces are beaten back, but we've no idea how long that may be. But what you're really saying is that everybody needs to chip in and contribute in order to help this humanitarian crisis.
Yes, look, I'm driving now to pick up a bulletproof vest that was donated to me by an ex-Royal Marine. People in Ukraine need military supplies. British government is doing tremendous job. Please do not criticize British government response. They are doing a lot. They can always do more. So write to your MPs to deliver more weapons. Ukrainians need weapons to fight back. They're fighting like lions, but they need to have something to fight with. Ukrainians need medical supplies, and they need them badly.
That's right indeed. And actually, Paolo, that's really good to hear. I think you're right. Actually, the British government on this crisis have actually shown a real leading role with all Western nations. I think they've been ahead of the EU. We've already helped in terms with weaponry and presumably, hopefully, with medical supplies. And then, in a sense, and have also led the way in demanding tough sanctions. Do you think on the sanctions, have you been impressed with how that's moved, or do you want to see more done faster, Paul?
We can do more ourselves. Stop buying Russian products. Boycott every single Russian company. Write to your MPs to stop any deals, any gas being brought over. UK brings only 3% of its supply of gas from Russia. Let's bring it down to zero. Let's boycott every single Russian company. Let's hit them where it hurts. Putin only knows money. Let's hit him in his purse.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've been talking about that through the show. You may have heard that we've got to hit him with it. I use the expression sort of economic strangulation. And of course, sadly, it is going to hurt Russian people, but it'll hurt Putin and the cronies around him. And short term, it's also going to hurt us because we're going to be paying at the pumps higher gas prices, higher electricity bills, and higher food bills. So in a sense, everybody's suffering because of Putin's actions.
Yes, and the sooner we finish him off, the shorter we will suffer. Ask yourself a question. Would you be willing to pay £500 more a year to save a life? I will.
Well, and it sounds like, essentially, you're going back to help. Were you due to go back to Poland anyway, Paul? Or
no.
So you're basically making this in order to help this humanitarian crisis? And
no, I have a job here. My wife stays here, but I'm going to help.
Well, I think
that's my duty.
That's absolutely outstanding. And, clearly, we all hope the crisis is resolved, but it could be many, many months, possibly years, depending whether or not Putin succeeds in actually taking control of Ukraine, doesn't it?
He will not succeed. He will never win. Ukrainians will beat them back.
You sound pretty convinced about that. And of course, even if in a sense he takes control of key cities, it's such a big country with so many people. He's just not going to be able to, in a sense, overcome that level of the Ukrainian people fighting back street by street, house by house in villages and towns across the country. Is that right? Yep.
Every single person in Kiev who wants a weapon was given a weapon. Russians will never take Kiev. President Zelensky, he will be the biggest head of state of 21st century. We still got 8 years to go, but no one will ever be bigger than that man. President Zelensky will never leave Ukraine. Americans offered to evacuate him. He said he doesn't need a right; he needs weapons.
It was an amazing response, actually, and I think he is showing himself to being a really strong, motivational, inspirational leader from from the front line, so to speak. And Paul, thank you so much for your thoughts and for your calls. And we wish you. Yeah.
One more thing. As Talk Radio, you could do one thing to show Ukrainians that you're with them. Play Ukrainian national anthem every hour.
I'll see what we can do. I know, Paul, thank you so much. That's a good suggestion, and there's no question. I think all of us are with Ukrainian citizens. And Paul, safe travels. Good luck in everything that you're trying to do, and may you stay safe and well and healthy. That was Powell from Twickenham, who's on his way to the airport. He's been donated a bulletproof vest. He's going to Poland to help with the humanitarian crisis over there with the women, children and elderly folk coming across the border. Absolutely inspirational call. Thank you so much for that. Keep the calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. We're going to be talking after the break to a sanctions expert from America about whether or not enough is being done. And keep the tweets and the messages coming in. You're listening to Tice Talk here at Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
World headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. Good afternoon. We're into the final half hour of the show. It's been a busy one indeed, and that was an extraordinary phone call from Powell, who lives in the UK, in London, but is actually now actively on his way to the airport, going to Poland in order to help with the humanitarian crisis there, picking up a bulletproof vest that's been donated to him. And we're going to keep in touch with him. And obviously, we hope that he stays safe throughout. But that is a truly outstanding effort and thing to do. With amazing tweets come here. One from Anne-Marie says, Powell is amazing. Full credit to him, and I hope he stays safe. Putin's evil actions in Ukraine are being outweighed with the love and support of Western countries and people. It's a wonderful thing to see. Well done, Poland. That's absolutely right. And some incredible acts of bravery, heroism in Ukraine, and also with the humanitarian crisis at the border with Poland. And a lot, of course, depends on how much the Western world can cause such economic damage with sanctions to Putin, to his own wealth, to the oligarchs, the leaders in Russia around him, that actually he comes back to his senses and there is a change of course, or indeed a change of leadership, because he has become a complete international pariah. And I'm delighted now to be joined by Amir Fadavi, who's an expert on sanctions. He runs a business called sanctionsexpert.com and is based in New York. And Amir, good afternoon here, but obviously it's good morning to you. Thanks for being up so bright and early on this Sunday morning to join us here on Talk Radio. So things have been moving incredibly fast. It's almost hard to keep up with. I was concerned that earlier in the week the sanctions being talked about weren't fast enough. It does look as though progress is being made, that reticent countries have now agreed to essentially freezing Russian banks and institutions out of the SWIFT system. In your view, what's been announced so far, firstly, do you think that's enough? And how quickly do you think they're likely to be able to actually impose them to make a difference?
Thanks for having me. So first, to the second part of your question, I think it takes time for sanctions to start to have their effect. Like Western countries could have done it earlier, but if they would do it earlier, there would have been the risk of triggering all these Russian aggression just because of sanctions. So everyone waited for Russia to first start and then start taking the sanctions. And I believe Putin, he did the calculation, even for worse. He was prepared for worse when he decided to attack Ukraine. I think in the short term, unfortunately, sanctions will not change the course of the war right now in Ukraine. However, these sanctions are designed to slow down the Russian economy. So in the long term, Russia cannot do the same thing later.
What does long term mean? Is that would these sanctions impact their economy within a matter of months, or does it take longer than that?
Honestly, I cannot tell you a time, but I guess the scope of sanction right now against Russia, they are pretty broad. So I guess in a matter of months, they start to kick in, have the effect. But you see other sanction programs, like for example, against Venezuela or against Iran or against Cuba, they've been there a long time, and still those governments are not doing what the Western countries want. So it's really
it's hard to tell. And do you think that, we've had a lot of talk over the last few days. Are you confident that the governments will turn that into concrete action, legal action, or do you think that actually there may be some delays in this?
I think they are. Already we see all governments passing all these new sanctions. It's really hard to keep up with all these sanctions over the past week. Then you see already some enforcement, France seized a vessel next in one of their ports. Already they started enforcing that. I think other countries also will do that. Yesterday there was a joint statement from Western governments. They said we're gonna be serious in enforcement, and I guess that's the key. Enforcing these sanctions, because it's going to be beautiful having all these sanctions, but if no one is going to enforce that, nothing will happen.
And let's talk about the SWIFT payment system. How significant is that? Or actually, as you touched on, will Putin have, in a sense, preempted that and found workarounds for people to be able to avoid using that?
They are pretty significant, though. That's in sanction world, they call it nuclear option. Once you go de-SWIFT a country or a bank, basically you say you can't, to a financial institution, you say you can't talk with other financial institution, so no transaction for you. That's really paralyzing. I think Russia thought about it before, because Russia sanctions started back in 2014, and they started to develop alternatives to this like Swift messaging, and unfortunately, because sanctions are being used a lot by Western countries like Russia, Iran, China, they started to develop their own alternatives.
That's right. And one of my concerns, which I talked about at the beginning of my show, is that Russia's now looking eastwards as opposed to westward. And there's sort of two questions. One, with the SWIFT sanctions on the payment system, will Putin cut off or restrict gas supplies to Germany as a way of punishing, for example, Germany and Italy? And then the second question is actually looking eastwards. Maybe he doesn't care so much. My concern is that he's already done some long-term deals with President Xi Jinping of China, and that perhaps he's got himself sorted over the medium term.
I think that's true. He thought through this, and he's really good at going around these sanctions. And this is where I think the Western governments, they should take actions. Sanctions are being busted by all these offshore companies. They create all these companies somewhere without being known that they are behind that. And Russia has this network of oligarchs that everyone knows, Russian money is in London real estate. How does that happen? All these offshore companies hold those properties on behalf of them. I think that's where they really governments should really focus to stop.
There's no question London has been, I think we've been completely naive and negligent in allowing so much money to be laundered through London. But so you share my concern, to finish, Amir, about Putin looking eastward to China.
I think he will be closer to China. He was already, and the thing is, China was already being sanctioned by the US. So they are creating these alliances about on how we go around sanctions. And they the same way Western countries are sanctioning, the same way they are thinking how we can go around that. That's one thing they can use. The other thing, which is less big, is the new use of cryptocurrency. It's a great tool to go around sanctions.
Indeed.
Iran and China are master of going around sanctions using cryptocurrencies. And I guess Russia also invested a lot in that. Now we're going to see how they're going to go around sanctions. Sure. But I guess he really thought about how he could go around sanctions. That's why he...
Amir, thank you. That's a fascinating thing to finish on, Amir, about whether or not actually Russia may be a big user of crypto as a way of getting around these sanctions. That will be something we will probably need to return to. That was Amir Fadavi, a economic sanctions lawyer based in New York and founder of sanctionsexpert.com, with his thoughts on the issue of trying to impose economic pain on Putin. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll take your calls, your tweets and your messages before the top of the hour, when Peter Cardwell will be here giving I think a 1 hour special this afternoon on the latest situation, the latest updates. And in fact, I think I'm just being told by my wonderful team it might be 3 hours. So Bob Mills is obviously on holiday. Peter is stepping in. That will be a fascinating show to continue these discussions. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio. Spreading your opinions.
These boots were made for talking.
Outweigh and outlast all other arguments.
Plain talking, pioneering.
Let's broaden our minds.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It is the final segment, quarter of an hour of the show. It's uplifting looking outside at the incredible blue sky. We've had some amazing discussions with various guests and you, the callers, as well, and some great messages coming in. We just touched then with the sanctions expert, Amir, and he thought that maybe crypto would be something that Putin and Russia would be using, and indeed a text message has just come in, sanctions. I wonder if Putin has investments tied up in blockchain technologies and crypto like Bitcoin, Ethereum. These will be very difficult to apply sanctions to. That is a really good question. I don't know the answer, but certainly something to watch. Lots of other tweets come in on the various subjects. And we've got one here from Paddy in Poole who says, never has warrior Trump been so needed. He would, I can't actually repeat that, it's rather rude, but anyway, he would sort Putin out is the gist of it. Jokey Joe is hopeless. Paddy's heart goes out to the brave people of the Ukraine who are fighting against Putin. Well, I think it's fair to say all of our hearts go out to them. Meanwhile, we've got another one here from Space Coast who says that the Lancers have sold half their tanks to the Baltic states. The British Army is undermanned, under-equipped and impotent. I don't know about the specifics of that, but certainly that is a direction of travel. And meanwhile, Peter from Stevenage, going back to the NHS discussion we had, who said he personally can testify about the NHS management incompetence. Recent short-term hospitalisation received excellent prompt care and follow-up. However, the management and organisation around it, totally useless. That's really helpful, Peter. Thank you very much for that. We're going to head back up north to Leeds, where Terry is on the line waiting patiently. Good afternoon, Terry.
Afternoon, Richard. I just rung in to raise a point which I saw a video of the other day where on the second day of the war, Imran Khan, the President or Prime Minister of Pakistan, was meeting Putin and signing new contracts with him. Now, this is a country we give 460 million in aid to. So should we not be pressuring them and saying, whoa, we're giving you millions in aid, but you're going, and betraying the West and signing contracts while this war's on?
Terry, it's a great question. There's no doubt that Imran Khan was seen essentially with Putin doing, talking business, signing contracts at this time, which was pretty extraordinary. It actually goes back to what I said about the sort of this axis of around essentially what I call Tice, which is a combination of China and Russia and other countries around that. And in the Sunday Times, Pakistan, in this map of the Putin's allies around the world, you can see Pakistan very clearly is one of the countries that essentially is on that axis, what I call an axis of bullies, with President Xi Jinping and President Putin. I think it's a good question. I don't actually know the specific number. You obviously do, that we've been donating in foreign aid. Well, frankly, if that is the number, then absolutely we should be saying enough of it.
Yeah, I watched a video showing you aid in countries we were giving it to, and it was 460 odd million a year. But while I'm on, can I raise a second point about the British Army?
Go for it, Terry.
I tried ringing your show a couple of times. Last year on Remembrance Day, 11th of November, I was working up at Allenbrook Barracks, which is near Thirsk in RF Dishford. And a few weeks ago, I went back round these sites, and I've raised a point with my MP, Alex Shelbrook, who's got back to me, because I says there's a couple of hundred empty houses on these sites, and the bills are to the, armed services. And I said, I've raised a point to him, and he's got back to me saying he's fetching it up with MOD. Why are our ex-vets sleeping rough on streets, homeless, when there's all these empty army properties? Why are we not giving them to be used by our ex-servicemen?
Terry, that is a great question. And, I mean, I don't specifically know the answer, but it may well be that, as you say, they're not using their assets as efficiently and as well as they should be. Well, I hope... have you had a reply from your local MP?
Yeah, he's raising it with MOD, because I've said to him, these houses have been empty for years, and they're just sat there.
Well, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, we've got ex-servicemen sleeping rough on streets. Now, I'm not being funny. I have 4 hotels around me, within 5 minutes of me. 2 belonging to Holiday Inn chain. Britannia's got one, and I don't know what the 4th one is, full of migrants. And yet you walk around Leeds City Centre, you walk around York, and there's ex-vets sleeping on streets. It's all wrong.
It is completely wrong that the ex-vets too often are abandoned. I see some also here in London, Terry, and I fear that very often it is actually just through incompetence. It's through not using those assets, houses properly, and we see it too often across various parts of the public sector. Terry, just before I let you go, one question for you, Terry. On the thorny subject of net zero, do you want a referendum, Terry, on net zero, or are you happy with the idea that our costs are going to go up and up?
I want a referendum because like I say, I work for the utility industry, and I go around all these big houses, and basically the ordinary working man is subsidising the richer people who can afford the solar panels on the roofs, the wind turbines, the electric £30,000 cars, and we're subsidising them, the ordinary working man. We shouldn't be subsidising them.
We absolutely shouldn't. It's just not right. And the subsidies are huge. I mean, it's around 12 billion a year of our money, taxpayers' cash, that is going to, essentially to fund subsidies for the renewable wind turbines, for Drax Power Station, for the solar farms. It's all wrong, isn't it, Terry?
Yeah, it is, and I'm not being funny. We're on the front line. We see we've worked our way through this pandemic, which I've raised with talk radio before. How we could go in 150 hours a day during lockdown, while other people were told to stay at home. So we're like super spreaders. We were never tested or anything.
That's right.
I've said that we're the front line. We get all the abuse from the customers, but we're only just doing this job. But we're the only people to see, so we get all the flack.
Terry, thank you so much for your call. That's Terry there with his thoughts, his concerns about houses not being properly used, and yet there are too many ex-vets who are still homeless on the streets. We've got a tweet in here from Ash who says maybe if Sadiq Khan hadn't blown his own budget on his own PR, there'd be more money to look after some of the TfL workers. That was relative to the discussion with the union representative, because it seems that London is going to be blighted by 2 days of strikes on the tube this week, Tuesday and Thursday, which means the great Peter Cardwell, who has just strolled into the studio. You may be walking to work, cycling to work, or working from home, Peter.
Well, that would be good. I'm on a bit of a health kick at the moment.
We're running
Richard,
to work.
So hopefully that would be good. But yeah, no, I think that Texter has the right idea about Sadiq Khan. He does seem to spend an awful lot on press officers and big pictures of himself on the tube. Always good to see big pictures of him. Maybe he could just make the trains run.
But actually,
that's what I'd settle for.
For me, I challenged actually the union leader. I just think it's all wrong at this time for them. And he said, look, the reality is we might have 2 days of strikes this week, and then it could be even more coming on. Yeah. Well, obviously, we've been talking about all things Ukraine, sanctions, what's really going on. So you've got a 3-hour special this afternoon.
Similar, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much to talk about, Richard, in terms of the invasion, the Russians being close in terms of what they're doing in Kiev. We're going to Kiev. We're going to speak to people there. We're also going to take the UK politics angle as well. Thinking about Ukraine's neighbours as well, a lot of them taking a lot of refugees, and what Britain is doing in all of that.
Yeah, and we had an amazing call from this guy, Powell, who's literally on his way to the airport.
My goodness.
He just picked up he'd been donated by a Royal Marine, an ex-Marine, a bulletproof vest. He's going back to his native country of Poland in order to go to the border to help with the humanitarian crisis.
My goodness.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And he was saying just how many were going to come over, and families in Poland essentially giving up, spare rooms to welcome people in. Obviously no one knows how many weeks or months or years this may go on.
Well, the humanity and generosity of people in such a crisis is wonderful. But Richard, I just want to ask you, what is the most ludicrous thing you've seen over the past 4 days?
Over the past 4 days?
In terms of this, because I think, whatever it is, I think I can beat it. Because there's an article on...
There's been so much ludicrous, but...
NPR, the American network, 5 ways to cope with the stressful news cycle. It's so dreadfully stressful just to listen to what's going on. I mean, a bit more stressful for the people
that sounds
in Ukraine.
Is this a woke?
It's pretty woke.
Site?
Nourish yourself. The kitchen is a safe space For a lot of us, maybe this is the weekend that you finally recreate Grandpa's famous lasagna, or learn how to make a prettier pie, or just lose yourself in some kitchen organisation.
Lovely.
In case you're upset by what's going on in Ukraine, probably a heck of a lot more upsetting for the people who are actually affected rather than people in America listening and watching what's going on.
No question at all. And at the beginning of the show, we were talking about the impact, the hospitals, what they may be going through, trying to keep up supplies and things.
Yes.
There's just so much around it, and I think it
affects the whole society.
It affects the whole society, and I think it's going to affect us. I talked about, Peter, we're all going to have to go through some short-term pain. The medium-term gain, hopefully, is in a sense is regime change,
Yes.
but that may be years away. We just don't know. And there is going to be short-term pain. People are asking the question, what does it mean for us here at home? And the answer is gas prices are going up, electricity prices going up.
But those economic sanctions on Russia are the right thing to do. Tough as it'll be.
It's going to be tough for everybody.
Yeah.
It is the right. What I've asked the question, I'm not totally sure I've had the right answer yet, is how quick they will be imposed. That's the big thing, and how quick they will really take effect. Well, for the next 3 hours, you've got Peter Cardwell here on Talk Radio. Stay with him. You've been a fantastic audience, and I've been propped up by a wonderful production team. Thank you very much to everybody. I'll be back same time, same place, here at 10 o'clock next Sunday. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Plain talk. Unrivaled talk. Talk radio.
Peter Cardwell. Political punch. Analysis with attitude.
Open discussion, healthy debate.
Peter Cardwell on Talk Radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to a 3-hour special programme here on Talk Radio. We're going to Ukraine. We're going to get analysis, explanation and impactful discussion from the country itself and here in London and beyond. Do stay with us between now and 4 o'clock because there's lots to discuss. The Russians closing in on Kiev, the implications for UK politics, the implications for the neighbouring countries in Ukraine who are so generously and kindly taking in the refugees from the conflict there. Also NATO's response and NPR, the American left-wing radio station, has put out a guide of how to cope with a stressful news cycle. A bit more stressful for the people in the war zone, if you ask me. We're also going to be talking about energy prices, about false images shared online, and talking about sanctions. What should happen? Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has been talking this morning and what she thinks. What do you think? Let us know. 0344 499 1000. Want to get as many voices on the air as possible. As much debate on this very important issue for everyone in the UK and indeed the world. Text me on 87222 with the word talk or tweet me at Talk Radio. I'm Peter Cardwell. It's a pleasure to have your company between now and 4 o'clock here on Talk Radio.
Peter Cardwell
on Talk Radio.
Thank you to Les, who's been in touch on Twitter already, saying coming up on Talk Radio, the County Armagh legend in his own lifetime. Thank you, Les. Very kind. Peter Cardwell, 3 hours. Tune in and enjoy some debate and agree or disagree without being disagreeable. That's what we do here on Talk Radio, and an absolute pleasure to have Les's company and indeed everybody else's. So let's just have a bit of an update because there's been so much happening over the past 24 hours since I've been talking to you. Left the studio at about 1 o'clock yesterday. And in terms of what's been happening in Ukraine and beyond, we've heard from the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss. She's been on the media this morning. There's been so much happening, so many developments, including in regard to the SWIFT system, which is the sort of online system by which money is sent around. And we're pretty close, I think, to excluding Russia from that, which would severely cripple them. When Iran was excluded from SWIFT, about 30% of its economy was pretty in terms of transfers of money, was certainly curbed by the fact that it was out of SWIFT. But we're in a situation now, this hour at 1 o'clock on Sunday, where Ukrainian troops are in control of Kharkiv. The governor says Russian troops have entered the second largest city there with street fighting. Ukraine claiming at the moment 4,300 Russians have died in the whole invasion, plus 210 Ukrainian civilians. Obviously, those numbers are impossible to verify. As they say, the first casualty of war is truth. But those are the figures we've been given, so I'm giving them to you. The Ukraine's defence minister has hailed his country's resistance, saying the world doubted them. I think they probably did, thinking the Russian power was so much greater than the Ukrainian power. That doesn't appear to have been the case, and certainly the resistance and the determination of the Ukrainian people has been astonishing over the past 4 days. The Ukrainian president as well, Zelensky, has rejected negotiations with Russia because Russia has suggested those negotiations be in Belarus, because Belarus, of course, has been used for those attacks. The Russian Central Bank has called for calm because there's mass withdrawal of cash. Russians are panicking, and Vladimir Putin has hailed the country's special forces for their work in Ukraine. In terms of refugees, there's something like 400,000 people having fled Ukraine, according to the UN, but of course that's impossible to verify as well. And Germany has finally come to the party, has finally done something more than giving 500 or 5,000 helmets to Ukrainian soldiers and has actually upped its defence spending to meet the NATO 2% target. It's a long time that Germany has been asked to do that. If there's any breaking news between now and 4 o'clock, my producer Holly is keeping an eye across all of the news networks, and if there's anything that develops that can happen, that is happening over the next 3 hours between now and 4 o'clock, we're going to bring that to you first here on Talk Radio, and we'll try and get reaction to that as well. We're going to go to Ukraine now. In fact, two people in Kiev. Asami Terajima is a journalist at the Kiev Independent. You're very welcome to Talk Radio this afternoon, Asami.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and we also have Denis Ganza, who is a Ukrainian youth delegate to the UN. He serves at the President's Youth Affairs Council and is also founder of an NGO called the Public Diplomacy Platform. We're going to talk to him in a minute or two, but Asami, perhaps we can get the latest from you in terms of what is happening around you, what you're hearing, seeing, reading, and hearing from your friends. Just paint a picture of what is happening in your city at the moment for us, if you would.
Obviously, there's lots of attacks happening around Ukraine, but so in Kiev, where I'm right now in central Kiev, and right now, for example, just like 10 minutes ago, I heard this massive explosion happening not too far away from the center. The apartment shook, and I felt the floor like shaking a bit, so like I could feel that it's strong, and I don't know exactly where it is, but I think it's not too. It's within kilometers away from where I am right now. So. We hear a lot of things, we feel them, we watch news 24/7 to see what's happening, and we continue reporting on ground.
What's going through your mind, Asami? What are people saying, thinking at the moment? There must be so much fear.
However, Russia has already invaded Ukraine in 2014, so like people already have been under stress for all these years, right? So what I find incredible about Ukrainian people is that they're so brave and they really want to protect their nation, and they're always calm. So like even despite all of this going on, yes, some people have fled to other cities in Ukraine or to other countries. However, people are calm and no one is panicking. No one is going to the supermarket and trying to buy all the groceries. Right now, we're on curfew from yesterday at 5 p.m. to Monday.
Yes, that was brought in yesterday, wasn't it? The longer curfew was brought in yesterday. Yeah.
Yes, but no one was like rushing to the grocery store to buy all the products. Like people were calm and buying only the products that they need. So like people know how to like deal with such situation. And I really, the bravery of Ukrainian people always inspire me every single day.
How is the Kiev Independent reporting this? How are you getting out into the ground and staying safe and actually reporting this for your paper?
So we are talking with several people from all around Ukraine, texting them as well, but we're also like watching the government Telegram news channels, or just like watching the local news and what other reporters are saying, and just keeping an eye on everything.
Okay, stay where you are, ask me if that's all right. We'll bring in Denis. Denis, you're very welcome to Talk Radio this afternoon.
Yeah, hey, hi Peter, it's nice to see you.
Hi there. What do you make of what's going on at the moment? Where you're in Kiev at the moment, is that correct?
No, I'm just near the Kiev, near the Vasily Kiev. It was there. The oil station just was blown up yesterday night, so I'm staying here.
Tell us what happened yesterday night. Just talk us through it.
So we heard a very big explosion. Probably we don't know what really happened, but then we saw that there was a big light coming out, and there was we see that there is an oil station here. So we were afraid that it